Hi everyone, very good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks a lot for joining us throughout the week, and thanks for joining us in the very last session of the Climate Academy 2023 virtual week. We wait for a few seconds to allow people in the waiting room to join us in the main plenary. And in the meanwhile, let's do a bit of housekeeping. As you know, if you have any question, please make use of Q&A tab that allows us to keep an eye on questions coming through. At the same time, we very much look forward to your feedback, remarks, or if you just want to say hello or share some document or any publication or whatever you feel is appropriate for this forum, use the chat button. We have quite a rich program planned for today, and I see many people have already moved and we're slightly behind the schedule, so I will try to get into the message right away. Hi, my name is Himanshu Shekhar. I welcome you all from United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security here in Bonn, Germany, along with our partner Munich Foundation, and in collaboration with UN Climate Change Secretariat, UNFCCC, an international organization on migration. It has been like very rich, very fruitful, and very learning fight throughout the week. We are talking about planned relocation, why to talk about it, and today specifically, what to do about it. We have heard from different perspectives, but in the last session, what would we remember after this week? To take us further on this journey, we have many experienced people who have been making waves in their different domains, and we could not have asked for a better person to take on this ride first. We have Professor Beth Ferris from Georgetown University in the US. And Beth, would you like to tell us what's your interest in the topic of planned relocation and how do we take actions forward? Thank you. Floor is yours.
Good morning, Elle. It's wonderful to be with you all. I'm sorry I haven't been able to attend all of the sessions. The time difference was just a bit overwhelming. But the sessions I attended were very rich and fruitful. And so I'd like to offer just a few observations about where we are, where we should be going, and come up with some suggestions. My background, I worked most of my life with refugees and internally displaced people and came to the issue of planned relocations in 2010 when the COP came up with its well-known recommendation that we begin looking at climate mobility as a form of adaptation. So let me just offer a few reflections based on some of my experiences and also as a researcher about how we can go forward. These photos, of course, this is Kivalina in Alaska on the left and Ile-Jean-Charles on the right, two of the areas which have been very much discussed in the context of planned relocation. Yeah, so we've come a really long way since 2010, but there's still a whole lot to do. So I'm going to give you just a very quick look back, some of the early dilemmas that we faced working on this issue back in the 2010s and early 2020s. Look at where we are now and then suggest some future directions, particularly for researchers, but also for policymakers and practitioners. You know, way back in 2010, the Conference of Parties talked about the need to look at climate change-induced displacement, migration, and planned relocation. We knew quite a bit about migration and displacement. They're already getting some attention, but the whole issue of planned relocations, at least in the humanitarian migration field, was something kind of new. I remember being at a seminar organized by UNHCR to talk about this, and nobody really had any idea what planned relocations were. The normative frameworks we have for migrants, refugees, and IDPs really don't offer much guidance beyond a general affirmation of human rights, which of course has to be central. The whole field of development-induced displacement, World Bank safeguard policies seem to offer some guidance, but the experience from resettlement after development projects was not reassuring. Most of them left people, and to some degree, worse off. Many terms were and are being used to describe this, from relocation, resettlement, retreat. Folks who've been working particularly on development-induced displacement often use the term resettlement, but for humanitarian actors, the term resettlement always means resettlement of refugees to third countries. I remember when I was in Brookings in 2015 organizing an international meeting of lawyers from 5 or 6 different domains, from human rights to migration to development to security to environmental justice, trying to come up with terms. And none of these are very satisfactory, but since the COP had used planned relocations, that's what we did. There's still some kind of messy areas around the terminology. Where do evacuations fit in? Jane McAdams doing some good work on that right now. Are buyouts with individuals a form of planned relocation? We can really get bogged down in whether or not relocations are always forced. Are they sometimes voluntary? Even when a community takes the initiative and decides to move, is it really voluntary if they're compelled to do so because of environmental factors? So we'll work to develop some general guidance and principles from a human rights background, and then some specific tools or suggestions for governments who are planning to relocate people. And since those early days, there's been growing interest in planned relocation. 10 years ago, the term rarely appeared, and now you see, in many different contexts, policymakers throwing the term around relocation, retreat, conferences being organized. Columbia, this conference, bringing up lots of case studies. Here, noting Erica Bauer and Sanjula Weerasenji's kind of review of the literature, where they looked at some 400 cases of planned relocations. But there are many, many more of these relocations going on that are never written up and often not known outside of that particular community or geographic area. And we've got more nuanced understandings of some of the dilemmas around relocations. Originally, I think the thinking was, well, people either moved after a major sudden onset disaster or in order to prevent the catastrophic consequences of environmental hazards. Now we know that, in fact, it's often a mixture of the two. Maybe something bad has happened and want to prevent it, but it's more of a continuum than a dichotomy of a preventive measure or a reactive measure. A lot more work has been done to understand some of the reasons behind planned relocations. Governments in particular often, try to sell these initiatives as providing environmental security to people whose lives have been threatened by various natural hazards. But in fact, there are oftentimes other motives behind it, political motives or economic motives. Land grabbing can be the actual reason for carrying out or initiating a planned relocation scheme. And the whole dynamic of power, who decides and who negotiates and who takes the decisions, and does the financial contribution of a particular stakeholder give it the right to shape the outcome? And then there are these big outstanding questions, and heard some of those in the discussion at this academy this week. What is a community? Is it everyone living in a particular geographic area? We saw in the case of Ile-Jean-Charles in Louisiana, one of the big issues was who was to be considered part of the community, with the state insisting, well, it's the inhabitants of a particular island, the island of Jean-Charles, with the indigenous leaders saying, but our community is dispersed in part because of these environmental hazards, and they should be included in the planned relocation. So defining who is a community is difficult. Eric and I used an example of someone living in an apartment building, for example. If a decision is made to move, do the inhabitants of that apartment building really need to be moved together? Is that a community, or is community somehow more amorphous? The whole question of, what constitutes a successful planned relocation? Successful for whom? And how do you measure it? One of the few studies I've seen on kind of a longer term study on the results of a planned relocation was an IOM study in Vietnam, where thousands of people were moved to protect them from flooding. And in the survey afterwards, people who'd been relocated said, to summarize, yes, we feel a lot safer not to have that annual threat of flooding, but we're much poorer. We had to take on a lot of debt to carry out the move. So understanding, some of the nuances around what constitutes success, what criteria. I'm a researcher. We always like to measure these things. How can you measure success? This whole concept of community-driven, community engagement, community-driven can mean a lot of different things. And we heard in one of the sessions this week with Robin Bronin talking about, self-determination as a key motivator for Indigenous communities in Alaska in making decisions to relocate. But community-driven, community engagement means different things. For governments, sometimes who are planning relocations, community engagement means organizing a meeting and telling people what's going to happen. Do we have good models where communities have been engaged? And how do you engage communities on a fair, equitable basis when the funding is coming from elsewhere? And traditionally, those who have the funds have disproportionate influence on the process. And the whole question of funding, right now, there's just a whole hodgepodge of funding mechanisms. Fiji has a trust fund. There's been a little bit of funding from the Green Climate Fund, funding from governments. Some of the multilateral development banks have taken on the issue of funding planned relocations. But it's, to do planned relocations right is a very expensive, long process, and the costs can be seemingly insurmountable. How will this play into, and maybe we'll hear from UNFCCC representative here, whether or not this is something the loss and damage mechanism could take out in considering how to adapt to climate change. So finally, in thinking about what is needed, from a research point of view, I think we desperately need longer-term studies looking at planned relocations when they occur, a few months after they occur, a few years after they occur. Sometimes the consequences of the relocation aren't felt for a number of years, and we simply don't have good data on what happened. We hear anecdotally about planned relocations that were tried and failed, never written up. But it only became apparent years afterwards that there really wasn't enough water, potable water in this particular Mexican community to support the relocation, or there really weren't good public transportation to get people to jobs in a community in Nicaragua after Hurricane Mitch was relocated. But, understanding some of those dynamics, longitudinal studies are expensive. We're talking to the same people over a period of years, but would give us a much better understanding of both the complexities and the dynamics that occur in the context of planned relocations. Really promising trend in the field today is community-based or community-driven research, or research that's undertaken in part by university-trained professionals, but in part by the communities themselves, where the communities can help set priorities and certainly bring their own knowledge of situations much better than outside researchers can. This field is characterized by interdisciplinary work, people from different disciplines. Traditionally, maybe social scientists have dominated, but this intersection between climate science and social science and policymakers seems to be a crucial one. Again, we heard this week in some of the panels how this could be improved. Sometimes it's just a question of jargon, of language, of being able to understand or hear what other people are saying. We don't yet have a collection of good practices. I think we could probably develop one now just based on the experience that we have. We know, for example, that reconstruction of livelihoods is absolutely key. Are there good practices about ways that's done that maybe could be transferred to other locations? Most of all, I think we need research to inform policy. We've got these, I think, pretty good general global guidelines, but I'm not sure how useful they are in most of the situations in which planned relocations are being discussed. Do we need national level policies? We've got a few of those in Fiji, for example, but would it be better to have municipal or community-driven policies? And then just to close with some elements I think we need to include in policy guidance. What's the relationship of relocation to what's already on the books? Who decides? Using what criteria? What kind of evidence is needed? Who negotiates? Who plans? Who advises? Who monitors? who adjudicates competing claims. You know, all of those could be and should be, I think, spelled out in policies on planned relocations. I think we need to reconsider this idea of planned relocations as last resort. When all else fails, then we consider moving the whole community. You know, sometimes just given the scale of environmental hazards, a lot of the economically productive members of a community may have moved long before, leaving a very elderly population that may be more difficult to start or revitalize a community after relocation. And how do we address equity issues? And certainly some of the marginalized groups stand to benefit the most in planned relocations, but do the policies ensure that? And finally, you know, where do the funds come from? Can we have some source of stable long-term funding to provide more stability and security in doing this? So in sum, there's lots to do, lots of research is needed, lots of creative thinking is needed to deal with some of these dilemmas. But, you know, certainly the conference this week and some of the other initiatives that are going on give us hope that we'll be able to address these challenges and to move forward and provide better guidance on planned relocations in the future, because they will be needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. This was just fascinating to see the bandwidth of discussions you provided, because we were listening from experts from different walks of research, of practitioners who have spent significant time on planned relocation, seeing the entire picture together, but at the same time still being very intrigued, shows the depth of the topic we have. You touched on finance, and at the same time, my work is more on adaptation side in the human settlements, and there are many issues that are being could be addressed together. How do we find these synergies? Why the name matters? Like, there are many of these questions we have tried to answer, but at the same time, going forward, they remain equally important. And to untangle some of these issues and also provide a summary of how we try to address these, I would like to invite 4 rapporteurs. First, my colleague David from UNU-EHS. Then I would go to Mary, and then I will go to Erica, and then Caroline. That's the sequence we have in mind. I also want to give heads up to all our speakers and panelists in the Q&A session. Instead of me asking, you have all done amazing work. The audience has been very supportive, but also for the panelists, let's make most of this opportunity. If we want to ask each other, if we want to share something with each other, feel free. So Beth, towards the end, you posed something towards Koko. So Koko, that could be your hint if you want to take up on that. At the same time, you know, Donna, if you want to pass something to Hind, and so on. The same goes for Erica, Caroline, and David. So this time Q&A will be run by all of you. Perfect. With this, David, you have like 3-4 minutes maybe to provide a quick summary of what happened over the week and whether we were along the lines of what Beth described.
Yes, thanks to you so much, Beth, for this introduction. You've touched on many issues that have interested us all week, and I'm just going to take a few minutes to look back on what we had. So we had 10 public events. We had speakers from all over, and they really brought a wealth of experience and insights from all over the world. I counted 20 different countries represented in the case studies, but I may be missing some. And I also want to acknowledge our audience who was persevered throughout the week, was very present, lots of discussion. So thank you for that. And of course, to our partners who've supported this and colleagues behind the scenes. Let me go to the next slide. Just a little group portrait for some of our speakers from the week. Not all of them by far, but I just wanted to show you who we are and give a few reflections based on all the things that they've said. So this is my, I suppose, attempt at a overview. It will necessarily be partial, and I hope we can talk about it more. But I think one of the starting points is when we talk about relocation process, something that was mentioned very much was that we tend to focus on that moment of deciding, planning, and moving, and often we forget about the long time scales that actually should be taken into account. And this is something that has come through again and again throughout the week. We need to take into account the prior experiences, sometimes rooted in colonial histories, prior experiences of resettlement, prior experiences with external stakeholders. And if we forget about this, then the relocation process, narrowly understood, is likely to fail. And equally, we need to take the time to monitor the situation, to follow through in the long term, to guarantee that the outcomes are positive or the best that they could be. The other thing that came up very strongly is the local context. Planned relocations take different shapes. They go very differently depending on where you're talking about, and that requires a great deal of communication between stakeholders, of dialogue, also the recognition. We talked about, for example, recognizing indigenous groups, representation. Those are all very important aspects. We had some conversation also on internal differences and conflict within communities, which echoes that question that Beth was talking about, is what is a community and what does it mean? We also touched on, we're very focused on climate change in these debates, but related to this question of prior histories, prior experiences, there is a lot to learn from other forms of resettlements that were linked to development, to tourism, to extractivist industries, to conflict and war, which are, of course, past experiences, but also ongoing ones. And this is something that we should keep in mind as we talk. And also, planned relocation is part of a group or nexus of different mobilities, and it may, in certain contexts, be only one option open to other people, or it may coexist with other forms of mobility. We talked about the importance of national frameworks and planning processes. We have some of our participants who are themselves thinking about this in their own contexts, and there are many aspects which I wouldn't dwell on here because Beth has already touched on them relative to norms, policies, and funding, also a key issue. And this then brings also us to another scale, which is that of international agendas. I think if I am to summarize our talk, our discussions this week, I will simply say that planned relocation fits potentially between or in very many different agendas, whether that's adaptation, losses and damages, human rights, and so on. Those are just a few examples that came to mind as I was preparing my slides. But it's very important that we keep a diversity of conversations going, also because the relationship between these scales is a matter of contextualizing and also feedback to international agendas. And we have existing work, and there is research, policy, and practice work to do, and we need to think both about what we have and what needs to be done, and Beth has already covered this. So I'll just conclude on 3 points. I think it's absolutely essential to think about planned relocation as a process that is anchored in deep cultural and political histories, and also requires a commitment and collaborations across scales in the long term. I think this is a very strong aspect of our conversations this week. I also want to dwell on this question of planned relocation as a last resort. We heard many cases where, including one that was at least a partial success, if the word applies, which was based on the fact that all other options had been exhausted. But this does pose a question of anticipation versus reaction, because obviously if you wait until the very last moment, you may not have time to organize and guarantee that things happen in a way that is dignified and that guarantees positive outcomes. And this, going back to the question of collaboration and communication, is fundamentally also a matter of perceptions, because as one of our speakers from Zimbabwe, Sostina Takura, reminded us, a planned relocation that is planned in a government office may be experienced as forced displacement and completely unplanned by the community concerned if they are not involved. So communication is essential. And this also raised for us the question of whether planned relocation is an opportunity. And again, the question then is what for? We know that relocations have often go wrong, they continue to go wrong. And this is where I would bring it back to process. And if it's an opportunity, planned relocation is an opportunity because it allows us to rethink the ways in which we relate, in the ways in which we communicate between scales, between stakeholders, and offers a new space to work on new processes. That was my attempt at summarizing 10-12 hours of discussion. And of course, I look forward to inputs from other speakers. To start us off, I think we've asked 3 of our participants from the week to just come to us with a very brief, just 1 minute account of their session, a key takeaway, a key action point. And if they want to turn on their cameras, I'll invite them in turn to speak. Or I'm aware, Erica,
so the sequence we have in mind is Mary, then Erica, and then Caroline. Thanks for David.
I can hand back over to you, Himanshu. Thank you very much.
No, all good. Mary, please.
Thank you, Himanshu. So I'll just give a 1 minute verbal summary of our session. And our session was on the theme of decolonizing policy, practice, and research. Just quickly, I'd like to thank the amazing panelists, facilitator, Claudia, who did an amazing job at presenting the ways of putting Indigenous knowledges, worldviews, and rights at the center of planned relocation in their respective research. And this is so important because, distinct worldviews, knowledges, and relations to community members at the front line of climate-related risks may be overlooked within technocratic planning frameworks. Now, how can a researcher achieve that by putting the people at the center so that it's not just an extractive process that researchers just fly in and fly out? So I've learned in this journey that if you really want to help these communities at the front line of climate change risk and associated impacts, you need to decolonize your research. How do I do that? Decolonizing your research does not begin when you enter the research site. It begins right at the inception of your project. When you start thinking of your research topic, your research aims, objectives. Once you are thinking of that, you should start connecting with local and Indigenous researchers and organizations on the ground to make sure that your project aligns with the values of your research sites. You have to remember that the knowledge that the people will share with you, this is elite knowledge. For it to be shared with you is a privilege. So as a researcher, we have a responsibility to make sure that that knowledge is used for the betterment of the and not to cause conflict or tension. Also, there are other.
Maybe 5 more seconds. I'm really sorry, but okay. 5 more seconds.
Yes. So just the last overall, I think it ensures that the research outcomes are defined by the participants. It's meaningful, it's relevant, and therefore it transforms their lives. And which should be the aim of any research, and which Amy, Giovanna, and Olivia's research perfectly done.
Indeed. Thanks a lot for these inspiring words and a very quick summary. Let's see how Erica, you follow what Mary just presented. Erica, you are up next.
Thank you. As Beth has just mentioned, and as this week has clearly demonstrated, the global evidence base on planned relocation is growing, thanks in part to initiatives like this Climate Academy and the work of so many of you on this call, including Mary. But knowledge gaps still persist. We still know less about planned relocation of whole communities than other forms of movement. And here are 2 key takeaways from our session about how to address these gaps. First, conceptualizing and measuring the success of a planned relocation is complicated. Success is about much more than houses built or dollars saved and risk reduced, but about livelihoods and culture and human rights and people's perceptions of their own well-being. Yes, it's complicated, but it's also essential. We need more comparative longitudinal studies with multidisciplinary assessments of outcomes to understand what success can look like, and then to learn about what policies and practices may drive more successful outcomes for relocating people. And second, researchers should break patterns of colonial research through explicitly considering prior histories of displacement and exploring community-based methodologies, focusing on community-led claims making and centering Indigenous and local knowledge and knowledge holders, as Mary has just described. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Erica, for this excellent and very timely summary. With this, Caroline, we come to you for the last round of summary. I saw you switching on your camera. Caroline, you still around? Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I am.
Please go ahead.
Well, allow me to just mute my camera.
Yeah, I was
Thank you
about to
very much.
say.
I would just thank you all for your insightful for your insightful presentations. And I just want to inform you all that we have all been trying to talk about this policy making and making the connection between policy making and academia, looking for it from the point of view of the practitioners. And from my view, I think over this past week, we have navigated through the complexities of planned relocations, from the initial why to the local experiences and community well-being. And as someone who's deeply involved in legislative work, I want to just emphasize that laws and policies are the backbone of compelling just relocations. And they provide a framework for stakeholder collaboration and ensure the allocation of resources, and above all, safeguarding the rights of the affected community. So as we continue with this conversation, I just want to request that we actually have an opportunity to actually input into an ongoing legislation, that is the National Disaster Risk Management Bill in Kenya. And I'm really looking forward to infusing all these ideas into the policy brief that we have spoken about, and also further on when it comes for public participation, when the bill comes for public participation, because I am at a very, very unique juncture where
Caroline, I really
I can actually input to the bill, and it can be an act, an enactment of parliament.
Caroline, I'm
So
sorry.
I really am really grateful for the opportunity, and
Yeah, thank you so much. We could not really get the last bit of your message, but we had this amazing input from you and the
and
colleagues.
the practitioner's viewpoint into actual action. Thank you very much.
Okay, we apologize for the technical inconvenience. We did get the key message that Caroline was conveying, and for the sake of time today, I'm trying to rush a bit because we have someone who has been a strong pillar of the academy program for a long time, and someone we wanted to hear also for a while, Koko Warner. Koko, you lead the Global Data Institute of IOM in Berlin. We want to start first is, I know this topic is something you care a lot about, but what's your personal connection? What's your entry to the field of planned relocation, climate change induced mobility, and the work you do? And at the same time, we would like to hear from you how the work on planned relocation, what we have discussed, maybe if you have to pick two things that can benefit the work that IAM does related to this topic, and how the global policy discourse can be made more robust. Coco, floor is yours, and maybe 5 minutes as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just a quick sound check.
Perfectly.
Sound is good. And I'm working on 2 devices. So I know you see my name big, but I'm up here in the corner. Hello. Great to see you all. Thank you sincerely to the organizers, UNU-EHS and Munich Re Foundation. You have been bringing a whole community of scholars together for many years. This, I think, might be the 15th or 16th. And Beth, especially for your enduring inspiration, guidance. You've been in some ways with us all of this time, and it's been really important leadership. So in some ways, my career and life tracks across the Summer Academy. And not to bore you with the details, but I've had the opportunity to go from research at United Nations University way back in the day. It was a huge privilege to be the first Himanshu organizing the academy, and that, yeah, it's so cool. And that introduced me to many of you in this community, whether it's Erica or Beth or Case or Tony. I could go on and on. Robin, so many of you. Then I went over to policy at UNFCCC, and what we had seen happening at that time. This will segue into your two questions. Beth mentioned that together And some of you, of course, are the leading lights, but together our community contributed to the uncomfortable recognition, and now at the head of state level, that climate change impacts have implications for people on the front lines of climate change. And moving is a matter of moving towards opportunity in the best case, but sometimes moving away from risk. And we know with things like climate change that some of those risks are accelerating, and they're large in geographical scale and long in temporal scale. And so right now we're a few weeks off. Beth is going to be at the UN General Assembly next week, talking not to heads of state, but to people who report to heads of state, and really helping them understand from a data perspective what the data is saying about the needs of frontline communities when it comes to displacement, and what could some of those solutions be. Stay tuned, just like follow Beth around. There's always something interesting going on there. Now, what's that going to do? We're then going from the UN General Assembly all the way up, milestone by milestone, with every conversation that we have, with all of our data, all of our research, all of our interactions with decision makers and practitioners. And imagine that it's now the beginning of December and we're in the UAE at COP28. What's going to happen there? And Himanshu, actually, this is the point where I would quickly summarize where we are right now in policy and what that might mean for us as a community. There's just not enough time in the day to acknowledge all of your contributions. And we have a lot of work to do at the Summer Academy. It will be right after the UN General Assembly. And Beth, I don't know if we get a chance to interact with you and listen to you again. But if we do, I'm sure you'll have some guidance for us based on what you experience next week at the UN General Assembly. So what's going to happen at the UAE? Many things will happen, but one of the most important policy areas that needs to reach a conclusion, or that will result in a next set of work for the coming 5 years, is the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement. Now, the Secretariat has just produced a results paper, and it won't surprise many of you that we're not on track. So read that. It's very interesting, a little bit disturbing, but what does it mean to not be on track? One word, it means overshoot. And what does overshoot mean? Overshoot means that we'll shoot beyond the goal of staying below 1.5 degrees or well below 2 degrees. And you know immediately that has implications for frontline communities. We're already looking for solutions for people who are displaced. We're already working with others who for a long time have been trying to make sure that people can capture the opportunity and minimize the risk. So you can imagine, for the practical and research discussions and policy discussions around options like planned relocation, this will unfortunately be something that really will be part of the 5 years that happen between the first global stocktake and the second global stocktake. Our job is to convey implications, real implications, and interact thoughtfully with thought leaders and decision makers at every level, and help empower them to use your findings and your experiences to plan solutions that do everything that we've been talking about all week. Make sure that we're listening to communities, let them be part of designing their future. And if relocation is part of those solutions, then we need to take all of this advice. So Himanshu, I think what I'm trying to convey is there's a really important policy moment, and there's a landing zone for this conversation of the Academy. And it's up to us to be able to target the audience and understand what they need and convey what we have of value to add to that conversation. It will not end. COP28 is a beginning of the next chapter. And that next chapter will culminate in 5 years at the second global stocktake. And hopefully by then, countries will come together and they will have assessed your literature your findings, your good practices, and have that much more experience with some parts of durable solutions. Maybe this is one of them. And I think maybe I better stop talking. It's already been 5 minutes, but you get a sense of where we fit into this bigger picture and how important this conversation is. Back to you. Thank you. Sorry, it was a little bit long.
Thank you so much, Koko. Always incredible to hear these insights and also find these, how do you orient? It's amazing to have inspiration, but what's tricky is to find right channels, right landing zones to make a difference, whether in the policy work, in the practice world, or at the grassroots level. Thanks a lot. And we will get back to you when we meet in Senegal to talk about the landing zones again on the very first Monday. And it's an excellent idea. I will get in touch with Beth. Maybe we try to get her again virtually when we are in Senegal. Perfect. With this, Donna, thanks a lot for your inputs on Monday on the policy process, particularly from UNFCCC point of view. Today we come to you again. You work in the vulnerability subdivision, and your work, we know, cares a lot about indigenous people, their rights, and the way you presented these ideas about planned relocation and how it talks about human rights on Monday, that was definitely very insightful, at the same time making the connection more obvious. Let's talk slightly more about UNFCCC's work. Koko already talked about global stocktake going forward. Are there two things, or let's say any number of things, that you're particularly finding useful from the debate that we have been engaging in that could benefit the immediate work, let's say, that parties aspire the Secretariat to do? Or is there some sort of wish list from your side when it comes to climate change-induced mobility, particularly planned relocation?
Thank you, Himanshu, and hello, everyone. Great to be back in the session. Before I answer your questions, allow me to recognize former colleague and good friend Koko. Good to be part of the panel with you, and what I'll be sharing is also part of Koko's previous role in the CCC. So really connecting the dots from different agencies and different experiences. It was really great listening to different colleagues today, and actually it really highlighted the fact that planned relocation is and climate change impacts, for that matter, is really very complex, and it's an issue that's very difficult to solve. It pushes us to thinking beyond the current boundaries and current mindset, and essentially there's no single solution. It is an interconnected set of approaches that we really need to look into. It was really nice to hear that in the discussion, planned relocation touched on not just a specific work stream that we are dealing with in the international climate policy process. It's because it cannot be lodged into just one. So planned relocation is a loss and damage issue. It's an adaptation issue. It's an issue on vulnerability. It's an issue as regards indigenous peoples and local communities. And it's an issue that has so many moving parts. And I think this was clearly emphasized in the speakers today, and even in the summaries that we heard. And this is the case that also in the process, the different elements that contribute to planned relocation is being touched on in different channels within the process. And I think what we can do, what needs to happen, is to continue the discussions in the different work streams, so we can actually push the agenda and really highlight the importance. Koko touched on the global stocktake, and then just so you know, in the global stocktake, that the technical report that just came out, it clearly mentioned that universities, academia, and other research endeavors are really it's recognized as part of the process, and that it has been contributing and is has been contributing in in our aims to actually reach the target set by the Paris Agreement. It repeatedly underscored the importance of the roles of local communities and indigenous peoples in various aspects of climate action. So we are, what we're saying here is also very, was also very clearly stated in the global stocktake, and henceforth the things that we can be doing. So what's next? I think if I can just share three things, and as Koko would always say, my wish list. I think what would need to happen is to continue this recognition that local communities and indigenous peoples and all those affected in planned relocation are not just vulnerable, but we can get a lot of insights in terms of ways forward to identify how we can address a solution. Second is to really, at the end of the day, policy process would be, we need to work with governments. So how do we then identify and ensure that these knowledge systems, these experiences, these issues are actually integrated at the national, and international policy-making process, because this will be the entry points for sustainable solutions. Last but not least, I think it forces us to have a mindset evolution. We can no longer just identify or address climate change and look at it as an environmental concern. It is no longer just a developmental concern. Right now, it is existential. And we need to really identify and transformational thinking and transformational actions. Transformational can be really identifying actions anchored on indigenous values, or transformational meaning we go back, identify ways to plan based on putting nature at the center. So really finding that different kind of thinking process, so we can really identify solutions that are to address very complex issues. So I will stop there, but we'll stay online in case we need to have more discussions. Thank you, Himanshu, and thank you again, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Donna. This is fascinating. You very much presented the initial idea where community is not something you work toward. Community is something that does everything itself, in a sense that community is not the victim, but the driving force. And I was just thinking about this throughout. The message that you presented was very clear, and that's what the planned relocation debate we are also trying to create, and riding on the waves created by experts like Beth, Koko, and all the partners. Thanks again. With this, let's sort of spotlight on a particular region, the region of Central and West Africa, and we are very delighted to have from the Senegal office of IOM, Hind Bennani with us. Hind, your work focuses more on climate change-induced mobility, environment nexus in that part of the world. And when it comes to Global South, unfortunately, a lot of disproportionate or severe consequences are going to be felt there. And this impact of climate change induced mobility or human mobility in general, whether planned or unplanned, have been disproportionately reflected in that part of the world where you are active as well. Would you like to share something, and what's your introduction to the topic and your wish list about what policymakers in West and Central Africa need to know, particularly from the scientific and practitioner community? A lot to ask for, particularly when you only have 5 minutes. Please take us ahead.
Thank you very much. So it's good news. I have 5 and instead of 3. Thank you so much. I'm delighted and thrilled to be here. Just allow me to share with you. I mean, since the beginning of the session, I cannot stop thinking of the entire villages of my home country in the Atlas Mountains who have been destroyed by the earthquake, and also my thoughts to the Libyans who are struck by a very hard floods. I mean, it's devastating. So I cannot stop thinking about them while we were speaking. So I'm covering West and Central Africa. I'm based in Dakar for IOM, the International Organization for Migration. And so I'm covering 23 countries, from Mauritania to Chad to Congo, Brazzaville, if you just can figure the map. Allow me to set the scene. What are we talking about? What kind of realities? What are the concrete realities we are talking about when it comes to planned relocation in West and Central Africa, in the region I cover? So first, we are in the fastest urbanizing region in the world, with housing and infrastructure projects springing up everywhere, and it seems like it's not going to stop for the next decades. We also talk about floodings. When we talk about floodings, we talk about long-term settled communities at regular risk in cities like Freetown in Sierra Leone, for example, but also IDPs, internally displaced people, settled in urban areas of the landlocked Sahel. Planned relocation is also regularly mentioned when it comes to coastal communities who are under the multi-layered pressure of sea level rise, coastal erosion, and urbanization. And in the Sahel also, we hear about some oasis communities living in oases who are becoming uninhabitable because of heat, who have already moved or are getting prepared to move. And I would like also to mention an interesting point, which I heard last year in Libreville in Gabon, regarding the communities living in the forests of Central Africa. More and more policymakers think of planned relocation when it comes to conflicts between wildlife, especially elephants, and forest communities. And I think that there is something to do here when it comes to the policy making, the crafting of environmental policies that are sometimes too very top down. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot of things to do, and also to think of, and to also to understand. So to answer your question, Shekhar, so what policymakers in West and Central Africa regions need to know? So first, I would say the basics. Importance to know the principles and the challenges related to planned relocation. What is planned relocation? What is a right-based approach to planned relocation? Exchange of experiences, good practices, and lessons learned from other parts of the world. I think also it's important to work with cities. Local governments need also are the forefront of such of the topic. And they are also the level of dialogue between civil society, the private sector, and to have a whole of society approach. I think also it's very important also to be very clear on what is inevitable and what we still have an agency from a policy perspective. So it's important to equip policymakers with analytical capacities and tools to be able to analyze clearly the root causes so that action can be taken in the short, mid, and long term. The third point is equip the governments of the less emitting countries in better understanding the loss and damages mechanisms, and also to equip them on how to negotiate, to empower the governments of the region and the communities as a consequence. It's also important to have a people-centered, bottom-up, whole of society, whole of government and right-based approach of policymaking, including the policies related to development, climate change, environment, natural resources. I'm thinking of water, migration, and social and humanitarian affairs. So too many decision makers might be tempted to use planned relocation too easily, not as a last resort solution. It's very important that we also support them in strengthening their capacities to use planned relocation in a fair way. My last point, and I think it would be maybe the most important, it would be giving visibility to the invisible data. It's important that we collect figures, of course, and quantitative data, but it's equally important that we build on the perceptions of the communities who are at the forefront. On what does it mean having concretely in the daily life of people. What does it mean? The impact of climate change, and also all this to inform all the loss and damage perspective. Second, contribute also to document the solutions that are already being implemented by those communities themselves. I'm thinking of the solutions for adaptation, but also the practices of solidarity within the communities who are at risk when they are facing disasters, for example. It's important to build on what is already existing and also to build on the solutions, let's say, indigenous endogene solutions. And last category of people that we shouldn't forget is youth. Africa is an extremely young continent with youth willing to have its say regarding its future. And it's important that we contribute in creating this space for dialogue and expression so that it is taken into account in the decision making. I hope I haven't been too long and happy to answer any question. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, and this was excellent, particularly knowing that we got you on board at a very short notice. Your point were very precise, very much to the point that as we are going to work in 10 days time on policy to the outputs, we look forward to receive your inputs once again. We will get in touch, and we will also see you in Senegal. Particularly your point about ensuring the invisible data is present. I think that is where quite often we feel like that there is a gap that is visible but remains invisible for years of policy making. Excellent point. Thanks a lot. I know today we are really running out of time, and I don't want to talk much because there's such a room. This room is full of so many people who have experiences from different parts of the world. And to summarize everything, I would like to invite my colleague David. But as we have now given 5 minutes to Hind, you only get 2 minutes. I'm sorry, I have to cut it from somewhere. But we also
to summarize everything.
Yes, I also take this opportunity to again request all our panelists, in case you would like to ask or share remarks amongst each other now after David's intervention, that would be the time. And also today is the last day. We will do something we want to do from day one, that we would allow our participants to ask the question directly using their microphone and camera. That means the only mechanism to do so, in my understanding, is to make them panelists, and we are happy to do that. So I will ask then Ananya to promote Alberto first as a panelist, and then we will see if we still have time for a question that Case has. So David, you would have your 2 minutes. And Case, Koko, do you want to go? Do you have a point now or maybe after? Okay, after. Okay, perfect.
I'll only be two minutes.
Now you're 2 minutes.
I'll jump off what Hind was saying. I think I really echo the point about invisible data. I think one of the things that this week has demonstrated for me is the value of case studies, in-depth case studies, taking qualitative methods. I think a field with many case studies is a healthy one, especially when it allows us to do comparative work. So that would be one of my actual points of encouragement from a research perspective, is to pursue that and to encourage other people to continue to do that work of in-depth, collaborative, people-centered case work. In my downtime this week, I came across a phrase that we owe to the 19th century French novelist Flaubert. It might be a bit of a weird reference for today, but he said, "La bêtise, c'est de vouloir conclure," which is to say, in translation, that having opened so many debates this week, the worst thing we can do is to try and conclude with all the biases and assumptions that would require. And as I think other panelists have highlighted, this is just one conversation in a long series of conversations that will continue to happen. And so my call, I guess, from as a researcher who's interested in science policy in particular, an action point would be, once we have, and if you have that capacity, that interest, if you can do it within your institutional constraints as researchers, as academics, would be to reach out, not just to the communities who you ideally involve in the research that you do, but also to policymakers, to NGOs, to whoever is working in your context, who needs to know about what it is that you know. and facilitating dialogue, focusing on that. And that takes often effort and work, and it's not always possible, but I think we should seek out every opportunity for that to happen. And I will conclude there on my 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, David. That was very kind and understanding of you. With this, let's make most of remaining 10-12 minutes of some exchange. Koko, would you like to take us forward?
Just had to turn on my microphone. I would love to ask almost like an informal poll. So obviously it's too much for this, but I'd really like to identify with us as a community. What are the characteristics of planned relocation that a practitioner would need to take forward in the face of climate change? Like really, really specific. Beth, I found it so inspiring. In your introductory remarks, you had mentioned, and I'm not saying it quite as well, that making sure that communities are involved in planning their own futures. But I would really like to know if planned relocation is in our future at a larger scale, which I don't know. How do we think about it, and what are the characteristics that we need to make sure are part of any planning and execution? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Rapid fire round. Anyone who wants to take this question? Beth, yes, please.
I'll jump in. I mean, I think that Eric and Sanjula's research showed that the 400 or so cases they looked at, about half of them had some kind of mechanism for community engagement. It would be helpful to know, what that looked like. Was it community initiated, or was it these kind of top-down meetings, or, what are good models for really involving the community, recognizing that community members are busy people and may not have a lot of time to devote to conducting the research or looking at all the evidence, but how and when can and should they be involved? I think is a central question for practitioners.
Thank you so much. Do we have another take on this? I see. Okay. Do we have another question in the room?
Let me
Yes,
jump
please.
in and contribute to the question of Koko. I think we need to put science, of course, in the context of planned relocation. Just from experience before joining the UN, on the ground, I come from the Philippines, and we always experience super typhoons, etc. And I clearly remember when we were assessing, doing the post-disaster needs assessment after Haiyan and deciding on planned relocation, one of the things that was always a challenge was the tendency of rebuilding or doing planned relocation in the same areas that were at risk in the first place, and just breaking that, we need to rebuild on the same place without understanding that in 10-15 years henceforth we will be experiencing more extreme events. So I think including that into the many factors in identifying and deciding on planned relocation is important. Of course, not undermining the inputs from communities. I think we need to put the balance into this. As I said earlier, it's a complex issue, and that will need delicate maneuvering of different factors. So I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Donna. That was extremely helpful. I also request our participants, in case you have a question, just raise your hand and we will try to promote you to a panelist. David, listening to all this debate, is there anything in particular where you feel that we still have not been able to touch upon? And while you gather your thought, I will try to then bring in Alberto Alberto, I'm making you a panelist so that you can use. Yes, Beth. Okay. Sorry, David, do you want to then go first? Is there something based on your work that we have missed so far? For me, I think we discussed about many things. When it comes to implementation, finance remains a big hurdle. We heard about loss and damage finance. We are talking about adaptation finance. But still, if you ask me, again, it could be my ignorance and limited knowledge. I don't see a very clear picture emerging still on how all these debates could be supported through international financial mechanisms. Are we going to be able to have a better understanding in years to come? I just wanted to open this to all our participants and to our panelists, but David, you go first.
On the specific question of funding, I'm probably not the best place to answer, but it is something that came up a lot this week. And I think what it poses is always this question of external support. And we think of that often in terms of the relationship between the community and external actors, but there is to a certain extent also this question between national governments. We heard from Fiji in particular and their community relocation trust fund that requires some sort of internal resources being used, but also support from the international community, and those are not yet in place, or rather it's not yet clear where the money is going to be coming from and when it's needed for that. And I think maybe the one thing I would add to what Beth was saying about the kinds of analyses we can do on the evidence that we have is also something that she mentioned in her presentation about responsibility and who does what and what does the process look like in practice. And especially through comparative work, I think we can try and identify from experience the different ways in which responsibility for different components of a very complex process that relocation is is allocated. And that's a negotiation, that's a political conversation, it's a very contextual conversation, but I'm sure that there are lessons that we can learn from comparing different experiences. Yes, I will end there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks a lot, Koko. Also, I like, and also in our previous academies, we had this insight from you that the words we use in policy language as policy documents, they matter a lot. And saying this very clearly establish a channel or mechanism for community engagement, something as simple as it sounds in plain English, could be extremely powerful. Do you want to elaborate on that? And then maybe one of the panelists, if they want to still touch on the finance question.
Only that I was sitting next to our incoming Director General, Amy Pope, about a week ago today. And I asked her about COP28, not to focus on COP28. Sorry, Donna, putting you on the spot. But I said, what would be your best possible, the wish list thing that Donna was teasing me about, but what would be the best possible thing that you could imagine? What would be the verb? What would be the noun? And then Beth, when you just contributed, that was almost exactly it. She said, we want a strong verb, like decides or establishes, something that's strong, and it should establish something for the communities. And that's why I got so excited and wrote that in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you so much. These small things that really matter. If the document says it should be explored, what says it should be established, there's a lot of difference exactly in terms of what comes out of that document. Thanks for this amazing insight. Any quick take from any of our panelists? Donna, I saw you switching on your camera. I think you, if only you wish. Otherwise, we would still try to take one question, and we have Alberto in the room. Okay.
We'll give the floor first to others. I've been talking a lot already.
Thank you so much. Alberto, thanks for joining. I know you're quite busy yourself.
Hello, sorry, I've been caught red-handed. I was smoking a cigarette, taking advantage of a little bit of sun. It was a cold day until now. Hello, everyone. Hi, Koko. Hello, Beth. I think perhaps we crossed briefly when at the time of the longitudinal study in Iraq, or maybe earlier the Brookings Institution study on durable solution in Haiti. But I just building on what you were saying earlier, and this is also something that was mentioned by Erica a couple of days ago. I don't remember which session exactly, but about measuring success and about measuring impact when it comes to planned relocation. We started, and again, I think it was Erica intervention that provoked these thoughts and these questions. And say, how can we, integrate or incorporate that or this kind of discourse within the broader SDG indicators and measuring progress of how does climate change, displacement, or relocation either contribute or slow down progress in that direction. And then I also, I'm sorry for so many questions, but just taking the opportunity that you are on the panel, was curious to know if you have any insights you might want to share. You mentioned at the end of your intervention today about the link with the fragility stabilization agenda, and how can we, while mainstreaming the specific needs, capacity, and contribution of targeted groups and territories that are or might be involved with planned relocation as an option or as a last resort, how do we frame this within the broader development and stability discourse? Thank you. And sorry for the informality.
Well, thanks a lot, Alberto. Thanks for both of your comments. I mean, I think we do need to look at the SDGs. I mean, they do provide a good framework. There's lots of data. There are specific indicators. Sometimes we just stay in our little silos, and use the data and the evidence that we're familiar with. But I think that's a great suggestion. And I'm not sure how to link the issue of planned relocations to the broader fragility, conflict, violence field. I mean, we know that people are affected by both climate change and disasters, and looking at that intersection is really important. But where do planned relocations come in? What difference does it make when a planned relocation taken, at least ostensibly for environmental reasons, occurs in an area where that's been devastated by conflict? What are the particular factors to consider? Oftentimes I think the success of these programs really depends on governance, on making sure the plans are good and the community's engaged and the finances in place. And those are precisely the conditions that are usually lacking in fragile environments. So it should make it much more difficult. And perhaps I'll just go ahead and touch on Case's question that was in the chat. Of course, I think you're right that we do have some ability to develop indicators for success in a variety of programs, whether cash assistance works, for example. I mean, we should use some of those established methodologies for coming up with criteria for success of planned relocations. I do think we've got tools that we can use, and yeah, I think Erica Bauer is doing a dissertation on precisely this issue. So, I think we'll wait until that's out and then read her survey of the literature and suggestions and can react to that. So good luck, Erica.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was excellent. I fear that our time is coming towards the end, and I want to ask our panelists, Beth, Koko, Hind, and Donna, and David, to sort of think what the take-home message they would like to provide in their concluding remark. There is a question that came, and maybe that could be a hint, is what avenues or channels do each of the panelists see as the most crucial to closing the gaps between frontline communities' experiences, needs, and wishes, and the work of policymakers on planned relocation in the context of climate change. So, and my question that I had is, the debate will continue, but we want to learn from continued work of each other. So how someone out there can get engaged, can keep in touch with the work you specifically do. Are there open channels of learning about each other? Are there open channels of participation? So these are the two things. And before we go to our panelists for one last time, I would also like to give a heads up to Renate. Renate, we will be coming to you in 7 minutes or something, 6 minutes from now, to bring the virtual part towards an end. With this, maybe, how do we go first? Beth, if you don't mind, we started with you. Would you like to be the first to? Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the main takeaway from this conference really comes from the title, how to engage communities effectively in the whole process of planned relocation, taking into account, colonial histories and immediate technical needs and the need to look long-term at what the output is. So I think the number one challenge for us is to figure out which context-specific mechanisms have been successful. I don't think it's going to be the same model everywhere, but it would be helpful to know, what's worked in which places and why.
Thank you so much. And for the researchers out there, are there specific mechanisms that you promote or sort of encourage, particularly the young researchers, people finishing their masters or early PhDs and postdoc, to follow? Anything in particular?
Yeah, I think those in-depth case studies of what has worked in particular situations would make great topics for master's theses or dissertations, and really encourage students and researchers to take up the challenge.
Thank you so much. The case is exactly, that is where the detail lies, and that is where a lot of attribution, application, quantification, community engagement, everything remains. With this, let's turn to Koko, and then we go to Donna. Maybe we just follow the original sequence. So Koko, Donna, Hind, and then David. Koko, would you like to share your concluding remarks? And how do we get engaged with the work your institution does?
Wonderful. For brevity, I've just put an email address in the chat, and I will press send once I stop talking. And I think there are 3 ingredients for impact. And it depends on whether you're a practitioner or an amazing academic, like so many of you are, or whether you're at the interface of policy and science and practice. But here are the 3 ingredients of very specific practice. Not too general, not too like global galactic, but really specific. The second ingredient is a result. How did it work out? Did it work out well? Yay. Did it not work out well? Also really important, because if it didn't work out well, that's an opportunity to learn and avoid others making that same mistake, or whatever it was in the future. And the third ingredient is share a specific practice and a result through a network. That is powerful, and that's how you bridge wherever you are, if you're in a frontline community, with the action. Because what will happen is networks provide the go or no go signal. If you say, here's a specific practice, I did this, here were the results, and you share that with your neighbor, and your neighbor says, oh, wow, go, they will share it with their neighbor in a network, and it will go on. And that's why I think that's the number one way to get big change in a short amount of time. And if anything, we need big change in a short amount of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Koko. Precisely, I think pretty much along the lines of what Beth was saying, learning by doing, having very specific contextualized examples of how to engage. There's a lot of knowledge. What I do as a citizen in this part of the world, that always helps. With this, Donna, your concluding remarks and how the community at large can benefit and also contribute to the work that your institution does.
Thank you, Himanshu, and thank you again, everyone. Climate action does not happen or climate discussion doesn't only happen at the international level. In fact, it is really more important on the ground. So I would like to share 2 things and 2 approaches to everyone. First, let us find ways to really contribute to national climate policy process development and implementation. We've heard several times that communities need to be engaged, need to be part of the decision making, need to be part of the process. One specific avenue that we can target is the national adaptation planning process and implementation. Recognizing planned relocation and there's issues surrounding it as an adaptation issue, but including it in the national adaptation plan is a concrete way for us to really address the issue, but at the same time also provide that entry point for indigenous peoples and local communities to be part of the NAP process in countries. I would really suggest getting in touch with the NAP focal point, with the climate change agency in countries, and find that interface and really use that entry point because it's there and countries are doing this. So we need to highlight planned relocation as adaptation issue through the NAPS process and implementation. We also heard several times that case studies are important. I really agree. This will really help us have informed policies. However, case studies and good practices, this documentation have a different narrative. We need to find ways to translate these case studies into ways that can really feed into policy processes. These two are two different things. We need that extra step to really ensure that the case stories and case studies can influence policies. And this is a very important step that needs to happen. At the international policymaking process, you have several entry points. We can contribute in the NAP process through the LDC expert group. We can contribute and influence the discussions or through the task force on displacement under the Executive Committee on the Warsaw International Mechanism. In the issue of indigenous peoples and local communities, there is a platform that is mandated to really harness knowledge and knowledge systems and values from indigenous peoples and local communities. So this can really help in the process. So I invite you to look into the LCIPP website and contribute. This is an area where this platform is very unique because it is working with a constituted body that has 50% parties and 50% indigenous peoples. And this is a clear entry point for us to build that knowledge system and influence the process. The Paris Agreement clearly recognized the importance of everyone. The inclusivity aspect of the Paris Agreement and of the COP28 is very strong, and it really invites everyone to contribute and recognizes that everyone has a role to play in issue of climate action, also of course including planned relocation. So there are a number of pathways. Last but not least, the constituencies. These are another entry points into the. This is another entry point in the policy discussion. So there are options, a wide array. So let us maximize them and really ensure that what we're saying here can land into these different processes in parallel mode, and also we can be heard by policymakers. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Donna, for providing these very specific entry points. I know from the outside, the UNFCCC process or the climate change global policy making process looks very enigmatic, very complex, but there are specific entry points as Donna just shared. I encourage everyone that all the work we do has amazing value to provide that specific part of information that is very rightly needed. Thank you so much. With this, I come to Hind. Hind, would you like to share your concluding remarks and maybe how we can get in touch? And I also request in the meanwhile, Ananya, now we have all the cameras on, maybe time for a group photo. So do your magic in the background. Thank you so much, and Hind, your time, please.
Thank you very much, Shekhar. I left our email in the chat box. So I mean, feel free, colleagues, to reach out whenever you want. So for me, the key message would be having the most bottom-up, inclusive and people-centered approach to our work. Should we be practitioners or researchers, policymakers, and collaboration at all levels to leave the knowledge and the know-hows of no one behind, linked to the SDG too, and empowering communities and the governments who are at the forefront, so that they have their say. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Hind. That was extremely helpful, and also thanks for the email ID I saw, because there is a lot happening in the West Africa region, and I guess definitely our participants would love to keep in touch. Also, thanks to David and Koko for sharing the email IDs. With this, we come to you, David. Please bring this seminar home in terms of content messages and your concluding remarks.
I'll pick up on the anonymous question about bridging that gap and be very brief and just say that it's not always an easy process, but as we heard this week, the production of knowledge is also a matter of power and access. And sometimes when you are in a position to invite somebody into a process, it may happen in research that we are in touch with people in the communities and so on. I think it can be sometimes as simple as extending an invitation, opening a door, helping people understand how processes are happening. As researchers, I think we have important roles to play as go-betweens and in amplifying voices of people we work with. I guess I'll conclude on that.
Thank you so much, David. This was very, very helpful. I take this opportunity again to thank our panelists, all the speakers today, Beth, Koko, Donna, Hind, David, Caroline, Mary, and Erica. Before we conclude, I must request Renate Bleich, the chairperson of UNU-EHS Foundation, for this amazing trust, I must say. It also happens with a lot of euphoria, but also sadness, to be the last year of the Climate Academy program that has been running for 16 years, started with Koko, and all the way here I am. So the support we have received from the UNU-EHS Foundation has been tremendous. This program would not have been here without you. Renate, thanks a lot for this trust. Thanks a lot for this support. This trinity of UNU-EHS Foundation, UNFCCC, and UNU has been working on different topics. And we invite you for last remarks from your side.
Yeah, thank you very much, Himanshu, for your kind words. And it's been a great journey, I think, for Munich Foundation over all these years to work on the different academy programs. So I'll be quick. I just want to say that this has been a particularly amazing week, I think. I think we've seen so many interesting panels and discussions. We learned so much, and at the same time we have seen there's still so much to do and so many gaps to bridge. And with all the energy in the room, so to say, and all the amazing presentations and questions and discussions we had, I'm really optimistic that we can achieve great things with this academy. So I'm really looking forward to taking this further and having the in-person week, and then keeping on working and keeping the network alive and really producing something which has an impact. And this just leaves me with some words of thanks. Thanks very much to our partner organizations, UN University, the UNFCCC, IOM. Thank you for all the participants of the Academy that presented their work here and shared all their experiences and knowledge. Thank you so much for all the other panelists and speakers that were a part of this week. And a special thanks to everyone who actually made this week possible and who put a lot of work into making this work, especially Himanshu, Ananya, Case, David, Anne-Christine, Claudia, and Christian. So thank you all very, very much. This has been really, really great. Yeah, and this is it for the first week of the Academy. Thanks to all of you, and it has been great. And I'm really looking forward to the coming weeks and keeping on working together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Before I let you all go, there's just a few things for our audience. There is a download center, so all the presentations that have been shared, we are uploading. The public sessions we have recorded. We are working on providing open YouTube links, most likely. We will be sharing those links. We will be sending email to all those who are registered, all those that have participated, with the link for the download center and the videos. So that is coming your way, maybe a week or two. Just give us some time. We are going to produce few very specific outputs when we meet in Dakar, in Saly, in Senegal, in 10 days time. Please keep an eye on our different social media channels. We will also inform you over email. Keep in touch through our email address. And thanks again for your time, for your trust. Have a nice day, have a nice evening, and take care of yourself. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone. Bye-bye, everyone.